Hello, and welcome back. I know in the last couple of videos I have promised that I was going to have more technical or more complex technical content coming. And, well, here I am doing another one of these vloggy things instead of actually putting out technical content. And I guess, on one hand, it's one of these things where, you know, all excuses or no excuse is a good excuse. And then on the other hand, you could say that it's, any excuse is perfectly valid. So my excuse for this is I'm recording this on December 30th. Christmas is just 5 days ago. The house is a mess. The office is a mess. Everything's a mess. Christmas's stuff is still everywhere and getting put away, and that whole 9 yards. And so, while I had great intentions of putting out some technical content, the practical reality of it comes down to largely being that I don't have a good place to shoot it right yet. I need to get that house and office cleaned up before I can start producing more complicated things. About the only thing I don't have to dive into about the only thing I don't have to make a huge production out of cleaning up is this corner of my office where I shoot these vlogs. Now, Christmas, of course, is a great time for upgrades. Christmas gifting yourself something that you wanted, or getting it from family or whatever. And I made a couple of minor upgrades this year, or major upgrades, depending how you look at it. And the biggest of those was to replace my audio setup. And that's actually what I want to talk about today. Not so much the replacement, but the rabbit hole that I've run down again with audio. Now, I've said this before, audio is not my strong suit. I don't completely understand it. I feel like I'm very much running in the dark and trying to figure things out as I go, and I find to a large extent the audio side of cameras and video to be very let's just say very much filled with sort of mysticism and black magic. I don't know where that comes from or why it is that audio is that way, but photography isn't. Photography tends to me, seems to be much better quantified when it comes to testing and understanding things. And audio, I can't seem to find the parallel there. So, like, to draw an example on this, if I'm looking for a new lens or a new camera, the sort of first question I ask is kind of, what do I want to do with this? What do I want to shoot? What is the purpose of this lens? And I can make adjustments or a guess at, like, focal length or aperture based on, and I could do this very quickly after I got into photography. It wasn't something that I spent years trying to figure out and understand, but I could make a guess as to what lenses, or I shouldn't say guess, I could narrow down the selection, the discussion, as to what lenses that I was looking at or needed to look at based on the like focal length and aperture, and then I could start drilling into sort of more nuanced aspects, if it was even relevant. And it's not always even relevant in my experience, some of the nuanced aspects. Like, I will see people that spend a lot of time talking about color matching and lenses, and that's something that's kind of important in the video world because of the complexity that kind of comes with video, but it's not really that big of a deal in the photography world, where you have better, it seems to me, better, easier tools to deal with color matching in post-production, and again, even don't necessarily have to have matched color in post-production from one image to the next. But my point here is that with camera or lens, I can say, well, I need something that's longer than the lens that I have, so I need to look at a 70 to 200 or a 400 or a 600 or whatever. I can't find that kind of middle ground when it comes to audio, and I don't I understand the various polar patterns from omnidirectional to essentially a shotgun mic, but the whole thing isn't quite as clear. And then on top of that, I find that there's a fairly substantial amount of coloration that mics add to the sound that isn't necessarily or is obvious to deal with in post or remove in post as it might, it would be for me to fix a color cast as a photographer. And so it's not just a matter of getting the right polar pattern, but it's a matter of getting the right polar pattern and the right mic for the right sound and the right thing. And like I said, on top of this, the even bigger issue that I tend to find is that it seems to me like there isn't nearly as much of an objective level of understanding or capability or concern or interest, or I don't quite know what the right way to phrase it is, but I can give an example. For example, the other day I was looking at microphones. So I record these videos using a Rode NTG2 shotgun mic, and it's not a really good mic. I would like to get something better than the NTG2, and so this isn't even a current thing. I've been doing some research on this for quite some time, looking at what options are out there that would be better than the NTG2. Whether I want to stay with Rode, go with someone else. I was looking at the NTG3. That's a pretty good mic. Now they've got the NTG5, which looks like a fantastic mic for the money, with some reviewers saying that, or rating it as having, as good of performance as mics 50 to 100% more expensive than the NTG5. But anyway, I picked up an NTG2 back in 2012 or 2013 when I first started trying to do video and understanding this stuff, largely on the premise that it was the mic that was being sold, as it wasn't tremendously expensive. It wasn't like $1,600 or anything like that. It was the mic that was being sold to videographers or DSLR videographers, because you could put a AA battery in it and you could run that into your camera without needing, with an adapter cable into your camera without needing phantom power and without needing an audio recorder. And I never really took advantage of that. I've always had an audio recorder. I thought that was kind of an important thing, especially with the limitations of VDSLRs and 30-minute record time, and the fact that phantom power opens up a tremendous number of opportunities for mics, or tremendous number of doors for better quality mics or higher end mics. So the battery isn't something that's tremendously important to me. What is becoming important to me is better sound quality, better reflection of the world as I hear it, as opposed to a colored version of that or a thin version of that. But anyway, in the process of doing all of that research, I came to discover that that shotgun mics are not especially good for indoor dialogue. They're well, I won't say generally. The advice that I keep getting and keep finding from professional audio recordists is, especially ones that work in film and TV, is that you're not going to get. Basically, it comes down to narrow the polar pattern on a shotgun mic. It uses an interference tube. It's all those slits that are along the front of the microphone that, along that tube. And that creates a situation where, in an environment where there is reverb or an echo, which is, something you run into more in an interior where you have hard walls and a hard ceiling, and where you maybe, for example, are booming the mic close to the ceiling, you're going to have more of an issue with echo. And echo with the shotgun mic, the sound coming in from the side will be out of phase with the sound coming in from the primary axis, and will create undesirable. I don't have any firsthand or really good firsthand experience to explain it, but the general thing that I get from the recording professionals is it will create undesirable degradation due to phase anomalies in your recording. And instead of using a shotgun mic for interior dialogue, what you should use is a straight supercardioid or hypercardioid end address mic. They don't have the interference tube, and therefore they don't create the phase issues that a shotgun mic can create. Now, I don't know how much that really applies to the level at which I'm working. I'm trying to learn this to get to the professional tier, but at the same time, I'm putting vlogs up on YouTube. I'm not shooting a Hollywood motion picture, and there's so much information to cover as a solo shooter, from sound to post-production to all of that stuff, that I don't have, I'm not entirely sure if I'm prioritizing my time ideally. But anyway, getting back to the story, I've been looking for a super or hypercardioid mic that isn't a shotgun for doing these kinds of recordings, because my vlogs, they're recorded inside in a room that's not acoustically treated, that very much can have reflections or echoes, and very much will could create this distortion with the polar pattern or the phase noise and whatnot. And so, where I started getting good advice or understanding good advice. So one of the microphones that came up in my research, and I'm not going to say I'm a Rode fanatic, but I've had good experience with a number of Rode products, and so I tend to look at Rode microphones before I tend to look at Sennheiser, Audio-Technica, or something like that. Is the Rode, I think it's M5. And it's a little end address condenser microphone with a super or hypercardioid. I think it's a supercardioid polar pattern, or maybe it's even a cardioid polar pattern. And it came up in a number of tests with various other mics as being adequate. I'm not going to say it's good. The reviewers had better recommendations for better mics, obviously. But it's a $200 mic, and, I don't have an unlimited budget when it comes to shooting video, and I don't have an unlimited budget when it comes to buying microphones. And so a $200 mic instead of a $600 mic is, attractive to me. So in the process of researching all of this, I got on B&H, and I ran across an article on B&H talking about dialogue, cardioid or supercardioid mics for dialogue recording. And this gets to the meat of my point about I don't really follow the whole thing with the discussion. It seems very confused to me. So a guy asks a question about the Rode M5 and or NT5. Maybe it was NT5. I don't. I'm probably screwing up the model number, but a guy asks a question about the Rode NT5, and would this be an adequate mic for doing interior dialogue? Bear in mind, I've seen tests done using the NT5. Yeah, I think that's what it was, the NT5, and it was. I'm not going to say the greatest mic. There were definitely mics better, but it beat the $100 mics, and it wasn't quite as good as the $700 mics. And to a certain extent, that's kind of what you would expect from price tags, right? And so in the audio samples that I listened to, it seemed okay. I don't have trained ears for listening to audio, so whatever. But anyway, the guy asks a question about the Rode NT5, and B&H, when you ask questions, if they're responded to by B&H employees, their software, their website flags the response as being from a B&H employee. So the first question, is would a Rode NT5 be an adequate or an acceptable mic? And the response from the B&H employee is essentially, no, it would be a horrible mic. You shouldn't use it. There's much better options. They also happen to be much more expensive, but there's much better options than using the Rode NT5. Okay, I mean, I'm not going one way or the other on this. I'm just, going through the thing. 4 or 5 questions later at the end of this article, and another person asks another question about the Rode NT5, and a different B&H employee responds that yes, the NT5 would be a perfectly fine mic to use for doing indoor dialogue, that they use it, the results are acceptable, there's better options for more money, but if your budget's tight, etc. And this is indicative of the situation that I see across the board. Whenever I look up a mic, I find one reviewer saying that this is a perfectly adequate or acceptable or even good microphone for this task, say indoor dialogue. And then I find another reviewer who, as far as I can tell, has equivalent experience and equivalent, trustworthiness in that respect, who basically says 180 degree the opposite. This would not be a good mic for interior dialogue. It's designed to be used with drums or something like that. And the problem I run into is I just don't have a clue or enough of a clue when it comes to all of this gear to really be able to interpret who's talking out of their rear and who's actually providing a valid, useful, opinion. Or they might both be, and it's completely nuts. But going back to my photography experience, and this is why it's so frustrating to me, if somebody asks a question like, would a 50 millimeter lens be acceptable or be an adequate lens for shooting portraits, there will be nuance in the discussion about, well, you might get better results with an 85, but there won't be, in my experience, or there isn't usually one person says, no, you have to use a 16, and another person says, no, you have to use a 100, and a third person says, no, the 50's fine, or the 50's ideal. There seems to be a less nebulous sort of understanding of things. And now, I mean, I get some of this is opinion based. One of the problems that I think you run into more with microphones than you do with lenses is the design of the microphone coloring the sound. And being able to deal with that, it's, in my experience, harder to mess with the response, the color, the frequency response of audio recording compared to adjusting the color balance or the colors in a still image. And so, to me at least, it seems like the ideal sort of response or approach for dealing with audio is to find a microphone that provides the color of that in the recorded audio that you're looking for. So, some mics are more sensitive to bass, and so they enhance the bass end of, say, a vocal or a speaker. Other microphones are, roll off in the bass, and so they don't catch as much bass and don't produce as good of a or they'll thin out a speaker, where thin being like that it doesn't have as much bass. And in fact, that's kind of one of my complaints with the Rode NTG2 that I'm shooting with, is I find that for me personally, it seems to pull some of the bass in my voice. Now, I don't have like a super deep voice, but it seems to me like it pulls some of the bass in my voice out, and I struggle to get that back in. Now, part of all of that too comes back to you don't sound the same in your head because you have reverberation in your chest and body and bones compared to how you sound to people in the world. You tend to sound a little thinner, a little less bassy to somebody else than you do to yourself, and that's part of the reason I think a lot of people don't like the sound of their voice in recordings. But that's always been, that's one of those things that I've been looking for a microphone to deal with. And as I said, as a whole, it's been extremely difficult for me to find good, clear information on being able, or good, clear information, good information across the board in terms of trying to make a decision on, where to even look. And with like the cost of a microphone, it's hard to throw money at something and expect to get reasonable or adequate results kind of in the long run out of it. That could get really expensive, or you're going to be spending a lot of time buying, trying, and sending back equipment just to figure out what sounds good in your environment, or that for your purposes. So that's been a big gripe that is becoming an increasingly bigger gripe when it comes to shooting video, is the audio side of the operation is just so much less objective, is I guess the best way I could put it. That there's so much less real clear, clean, this is the angle of view, this is the response that there is that I've found, at least, that there is in photography. And I'm sure that some audio professional recording professional reading this or watching this is going, you're crazy, it's so clear, I don't understand any of that photography stuff. And I know there's an understanding gap, which on my end, in understanding or trying to understand what it is that I'm looking at, or what it is that all this stuff does. But like I said, it also seems to me that there's very clearly a objective measurement gap, or a clean measurement gap, or I'm not even quite sure the way to put it, that it's not obvious to me at all what a good choice for something is in a given situation. So that's my rant on finding microphones and with respect to audio for video. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. If you found this remotely interesting, please smash the like button. And for content, more content, like on the process of learning video, because that's largely what I'm looking at for the most part, is documenting my struggles going through and learning how to shoot video at a high level or serious level. Please consider subscribing. Any of that stuff would help. But anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time.